Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to explore a comparison today that, well, you probably didn't see coming.
No, it's definitely an unexpected pairing. We're looking at artificial intelligence, specifically large language models, LLMs,
Right.
and comparing them to, of all things, the traditional craft of quilting.
It sounds almost strange at first, but we're drawing insights from uh, quite an interesting article. The author seems to be someone who's really deep into AI research,
Yeah, Minshin's working on a dissertation on AI's impact, I think.
but is also a quilter. So they have this kind of unique hands-on perspective on both worlds.
And it's that personal connection that makes the analogy work so well, I think. It uses something very physical, very tangible, working with fabric, to help us wrap our heads around what these complex AI models are actually doing.
Absolutely. It helps visualize it. So our mission here is to unpack the ideas from this source, this article, break them down like you'd cut fabric squares,
Huh, nice one.
and then stitch them back together, hopefully giving you a clearer picture of how LLMs work, but also, importantly, how human creativity still plays a massive role, even with these powerful tools.
It's about finding that surprising common ground.
Yeah.
And seeing what those connections tell us about making things, whether it's with code or with cotton.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Let's unpack this unexpected comparison, quilting and LLMs, and see what it reveals. Okay, so where do we start? The article begins with the absolute basics, the raw materials. What are we talking about in quilting?
Well, in quilting, it's fabric. And not just a little bit. Serious quilters build up what they call a stash. It's basically a library of fabric.
A library. I like that.
Yeah, and it's often huge. Yards and yards, specific cuts like fat quarters, those rectangle-ish pieces, good for variety.
Oh, right.
Or even whole bolts of fabric they use a lot or really love. It's a collection built over time.
And it's not just random scraps, is it? There's intention behind building this library.
Oh, absolutely. The article really stresses this. Quilters curate these collections. They choose fabrics for color, for texture, the print, maybe the designer. They often organize it meticulously by color is common.
So it's a working palette.
Exactly, a rich, accessible palette. And every single piece is distinct. It has its own character. The specific shade of blue, the feel of the cotton versus silk, the boldness of the pattern, that uniqueness matters.
Okay, so you've got this huge, organized, diverse library of physical stuff fabric. How does that translate to the world of LLMs? What are their raw materials?
A parallel there is the LLM's training data. It's their library, but it's digital text. A mind-bogglingly enormous amount of text.
Like unimaginably big.
Pretty much. We're talking petabytes, billions, trillions of words. And it comes from everywhere. Books, news articles, scientific papers, websites, social media conversations, code. Basically, any text humans have produced and digitized.
Wow. Okay. So the diversity is key there, too, just like with the fabric.
Absolutely crucial. And just like each fabric piece has its own qualities, each chunk of text in that massive corpus has its own characteristics.
Like what?
Well, its voice, its tone, the style of writing, the perspective it offers. A passage from a legal document sounds completely different from a poem, which sounds different from a Reddit thread.
Right. Different textures, different patterns in the language itself.
Exactly. The LLM learns to recognize and eventually replicate these different linguistic textures and patterns, much like a quilter understands the difference between working with a stretchy knit versus a stiff canvas.
So parallel number one is this foundation. Both start with a massive, incredibly diverse collection of source material, fabric for the quilter, text data for the LLM.
Yes, and the scale is just immense in both cases, though obviously orders of magnitude different. But the principle is the same.
Yeah.
You need that vastness and variety to fuel the creative process, to have all the potential colors and shapes available.
It sets the stage perfectly. You have all this potential, this raw material. But that's just the start, isn't it? The real magic, the core of the analogy, is what happens next.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. The process. Think about the quilter. They don't just take a whole bolt of fabric and call it a quilt. What's the fundamental first step they take?
They cut it up. They take those big pieces and slice them into smaller specific shapes. Squares, triangles, strips, whatever the design calls for.
Exactly. It's a process of deconstruction. You're breaking down the original form, the continuous pattern on the fabric yardage, into these manageable units, fragmenting it.
And then comes the flip side, putting it back together. Reassembly.
Yes, but, and this is key, it's reassembly with intention. The quilter takes those little pieces and stitches them together in a specific order, following a pattern, maybe one they designed or one they bought. They're arranging the colors, the shapes, building blocks, building the whole quilt top.
It's a transformation, isn't it? The original fabric piece isn't really recognizable as itself anymore?
Precisely. It's been fundamentally changed, reshaped, integrated into something completely new.
And the article makes a really crucial point here. The result, the quilt, is unique, even if you use a standard pattern.
Totally. Give the same pattern to 10 quilters, they'll all look different. Why is that?
Well, it has to be the choices, right? The pattern might say, use a blue square here, but the quilter might have like 50 different blue fabrics in their stash.
Exactly. Which specific blue? With what pattern? Next to which specific green? Those micro choices repeated over and over make each quilt unique. That particular combination of those specific little pieces hasn't existed before in exactly that arrangement.
Okay, now connect that to the LLM. How does that process mirror what happens when we prompt an AI?
It's remarkably similar conceptually. When you prompt an LLM asking it to generate text, it doesn't just copy and paste huge sections from its training data. That's a common misconception.
Right, it's not plagiarism in that sense.
No. Instead, it performs a kind of linguistic deconstruction and reassembly. It slices through its massive text library.
But it's taking smaller units.
Yes. Words, phrases, common sentence structures, bits of information, stylistic elements. Think of these as the LLM's fabric pieces. And then, based on the incredibly complex patterns it learned during training.
Patterns like grammar, context, how ideas usually link together.
Exactly. How words statistically tend to follow other words, how sentences are built, how different styles sound. It uses these learned patterns, its internal quilting instructions, to reassemble those linguistic pieces in response to your specific prompt.
So it's genuinely creating something new by recombining existing elements in a novel way.
Precisely. It's remixing, reshaping, creatively assembling based on the prompt and its training. The output is the newly generated text, a unique combination tailored, ideally, to what you asked for.
So the core parallel holds strong, break down the raw stuff, fabric text, into smaller bits, then intentionally put them back together, following a pattern prompt guidance, to create something novel, quilt-generated text.
It emphasizes transformation, not just copying.
Yeah.
You're fundamentally altering the original material to make something that didn't exist before in that form.
Okay, that's a really powerful way to think about the process. But it brings up another interesting point from the article, something almost paradoxical. How does uniqueness come from using the same starting materials?
Yes. This really highlights the human role. The article points out a simple fact about quilting. Many quilters buy the same fabrics.
Oh yeah, definitely. Designers release fabric lines, maybe a collection of 20 coordinating prints, and they're sold everywhere. Thousands of quilters might buy that exact same bundle.
So quite literally, they're starting with identical sets of raw materials, or at least a big overlap. Yet, we already established the finished quilts look incredibly different. Sometimes you wouldn't even guess they came from the same fabric line.
So how does that happen if the ingredients are the same?
It comes down purely to the choices the individual quilter makes. Which fabrics do they choose to feature prominently? Which ones become just tiny accents? What pattern do they use? Do they add a different border? How do they arrange the light and dark values?
It's their personal taste, their interpretation.
Exactly. Their aesthetic, their skill, their experience, even their mood that day, perhaps. They take the shared potential of that fabric bundle and infuse it with their unique perspective. The human is the variable.
And the claim is, this is what's happening with LLMs, too.
Precisely the same principle applies. Think about it. The major LLMs, while having differences, are largely trained on overlapping data sets. Much of the internet, digitized books, there's a huge common pool of language they all learn from.
And we users, we generally prompt them using the same language, like English. Shared vocabulary, shared grammar.
Right. So we're all drawing from a similar language stash, you could say.
And yet,
the outputs vary wildly.
Yeah.
Even if two people ask the same model a similar question, yes. And why? Because of us. The human user acts as that differentiating factor, just like the quilter with the fabric bundle. Your prompt isn't just a neutral request.
It carries my intent, my tone.
Your specific phrasing, the details you include or omit, the style you hint at, these are your choices, guiding the LLM's assembly process. It's like telling the quilter which blue square to use where.
And it's not just the first prompt either, is it? It's the back and forth.
Crucially, yes.
Yeah.
It's iterative. How you react to the first output, the way you ask for changes, the clarifications you provide, you're actively steering the model. You're guiding its reassembly process based on your judgment.
So you're kind of co-creating the final text.
Absolutely. It's a partnership. The uniqueness doesn't just come from the model. It comes significantly from the human guiding it, providing that specific individual intention that turns the shared linguistic potential into a distinct piece of output.
This leads into something else the article touches on, which I found really fascinating, the psychology of it all. Why does the output feel like something we had a hand in?
Yeah, it brings in this psychological concept, sometimes called the contagion of ownership, or more famously, the endowment effect. Researchers like Kahneman explored this.
The idea that we value things more if we feel we own them or made them.
Exactly. Or even just interacted with them significantly. When we invest effort, make choices, leave our mark on something, whether it's physical or conceptual, it becomes psychologically ours. We feel connected to it.
Okay, like with the quilting pattern example.
Perfect example. You buy a commercial pattern. Technically, the design isn't yours. But the moment you start picking your fabrics, maybe tweaking a block size slightly, deciding to quilt it differently,
Yeah.
you're making it your own.
You're embedding yourself in it.
Yes. You're applying your skill, your taste. By the time it's done, even if it follows the pattern closely, it feels like your creation because of your choices and labor. You've left your psychological fingerprint all over it.
And the argument is we do the same thing when we're prompting an LLM.
The article suggests that very same cognitive process is at play. Crafting a prompt isn't just typing. It's thinking, deciding, expressing your need, refining the output, asking for revisions, steering the tone that's active engagement.
You're investing mental effort, making choices.
You are embedding your preferences, your voice, your mental model into the interaction. So even though the LLM is technically generating the sequence of words,
The fact that I guided it, I shaped it through my prompts and feedback, makes the result feel connected to me.
yes, it resonates with your intention because you steered it there. It's not just random machine output, it's output that reflects the direction you provided. That interaction creates a sense of contribution, a feeling of ownership or co-ownership.
That's a really powerful insight. It reframes the interaction from just using a tool to something more like a collaboration, tapping into how our minds naturally work.
Absolutely. Whether you're stitching fabric or prompting an AI, the human participant inevitably infuses the work with their own identity, their choices, priorities, biases even. It's this human element that makes the end product feel personal and unique, even when the starting materials or the core tool are shared.
So let's pull all these threads together. We've got the raw materials analogy, the deconstruction reassembly process, the uniqueness from shared sources via human choice, and this psychological ownership. What's the big picture takeaway here for creativity in the age of AI?
I think the core message, the loudest echo from this whole comparison, is incredibly important and maybe even reassuring. It's that human creativity, human judgment, human individuality, they remain absolutely central. Irreplaceable, really.
The AI, the LLM, is like a superpowered tool in this analogy, like an amazing sewing machine that can stitch faster than any human, or a rotary cutter that's incredibly precise.
Exactly. It can handle complex assembly, process vast amounts of the raw material language incredibly quickly. It can even suggest combinations or pathways, linguistic patterns that we might not have thought of immediately just because of the sheer scale it operates on.
So it's great for exploration, for speed, for getting past blocks.
Definitely a powerful assistant for brainstorming, drafting, iterating, but
But the vision, the artistry, the reason for creating it in the first place.
that still comes from the human. The nuanced decisions about tone, style, emotional impact, the overall message that's the human director guiding the process. The LLM might be the orchestra, capable of playing anything.
But the human is the conductor, choosing the piece, setting the tempo, shaping the performance.
Precisely. Providing the unique intention that gives the final work its character and meaning.
The article uses that lovely phrase describing creation with fabric or language as a dance.
Yes, a dance between the materials, the fabric stash, the text data,
Yeah.
and the human mind. The quilter, the prompter. It's not one dominate the other, it's an interaction.
And every stitch, every AI-generated sentence that was guided by a human prompt carries a little piece of that human's intention, their personality, forward.
It's a projection of us through the medium, mediated by the tool. So this perspective really reframes AI, doesn't it? Not as a replacement for creativity.
But as a potential partner, a tool that interacts with and maybe even enhances our own innate drive to make things, to express ourselves.
Yeah. It suggests the soul of the work still fundamentally resides with the human creator, the one holding the vision, even if the tool is doing some of the heavy lifting.
That really was a fascinating way to look at it, a deep dive into quilting, of all things, shedding light on LLMs.
It provides such a useful, grounded analogy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Helps take some of the black box mystery out of AI by comparing its processes to a familiar, hands-on craft. You see the mechanics of processing and reassembling information mirrored.
And more than just the mechanics, it really drives home the point about the human element. That our choices, our creativity, our personality, they're not somehow bypassed by these tools. They're actually crucial in shaping what the tools produce.
Yeah, we trace that thread all the way through, from the initial comparison of the libraries of fabric and text,
Yeah.
through that core idea of breaking things down and building them back up. Seeing how uniqueness emerges from shared starting points because of individual choices.
And landing on that psychological insight about why we feel connected to the output, even when it's AI assisted.
It's a journey that really emphasizes the enduring role of the person in the process.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you use AI, or really as you engage in any creative act, think about this analogy. Ask yourself, where am I in this process? Where is my signature being left? How are my intentions, my choices, guiding the outcome?
It's a great question. What part of you is being embedded in the final product? Whether it's a report, an email, a piece of code, or even a quilt. Recognizing that interaction, that dance, can change how you approach these tools.
Definitely something to reflect on.
And speaking of digging deeper, for listeners interested in the more practical side of AI, especially in a business context, how to leverage these insights for decision-making, there's a book we can recommend. It's Shelley Meadows, From Data to Decisions, AI Insights for Business Leaders.
Right, that sounds very relevant, offers perspectives on using AI effectively.
Exactly. Good practical insights. It's available on Amazon if you want to check it out.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. It's been really illuminating. Keep exploring, keep asking questions.
And keep creating, whatever your medium might be.